1st, 2017. This is a regular board meeting. Unusual that we're on Wednesday. Welcome to the Board of County Commissioners conference room. And we have two items on the agenda today. Under County Administration, items 1A and B. But before we get started, Mr. Elsey, you are administrator today. Any emergency business or changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Okay, then we'll move forward with what we have on the agenda. And the first is a work session, a presentation of proposed revisions to LRAPA, Plain Regional Air Pollution Authority outdoor burning rules. And today we have Mr. Millen Hugh as the director of LRAPA. So, Mr. Elsey.
And I will turn it right over to Mr. Huff.
Okay, thank you. I'm here with a couple of key staff from LRAPA, Joan Ehouse, she's also on the screen, and John Morrissey, Field Compliance Officer for many years. And
I was going to say, John's a newbie.
Yeah. Joan's been, she's getting to be a long timer. She's been with us about 3.5 years now, and so she's been a great addition to our staff. So we want to talk to you about one key provision of some proposed outdoor burning rule changes, specifically having to do with the Eugene urban growth boundary. But we thought we'd take advantage of the opportunity just to update you on a number of things, especially with this notable wildfire smoke season. And so I've got several slides in here. We go pretty quick, but just to give you a quick recap of what we all endured here in recent months. So we want to talk about some of the air quality trends, and especially with that wildfire smoke, the changes that our advisory committee has recommended in outdoor burning, that the board adopted most of those changes in October. We had some meetings about those and this urban growth boundary Eugene issue. Had public notice in August. The LRAPA board adopted those on October 12th, except for the Eugene UGB proposal. This is a 15-month chart of air quality data that we routinely provide to the LRAPA board each month. 15 months to be in order to not just give the last year, but also be able to compare the same season a year ago. So you can see here with the wildfire smoke that we had this year, you can quickly compare that to back in August, September of 2016, and you can see what air quality is normally like when we don't have those horrendous impacts like we had at all of our monitoring sites this past August and September. This one is for Oak Ridge. And you can see normally the highest smoke levels in Oak Ridge occur in the November to February time period. We had a good winter, and that's part of the success up there in Oak Ridge is that those levels have been improving in recent years. We're very encouraged by that trend. But this wildfire smoke is something like we've never seen before, at least in the 30 or more years that we've had consistent monitoring methods. You might see something at those kind of levels if you go back to Black Tuesday in the 60s before any of the field burning programs started. You might have some high winter days back before wigwam waste burners were phased out of wood products mills. But in the last 30 years where we've been consistently monitoring, we have not had anything approaching this. This is a standard slide, very useful graphic, but it compares the human hair to the particulate that we measure and that is concerned. The blue circles there are the PM10 that are 10 micron and smaller.
It's more of Gary's hair than, say, mine.
Thank you for pointing that out.
So we're talking about very small particles, but those are the ones that get deep in the lungs, and that's why they're the health concern. And when you have this wildfire smoke like we had, it's clear that there were a lot of people had respiratory systems impacted. The trends have been good for particulate matter, no matter whether you measure PM10 or PM2.5. The blue diamonds are what we have been watching most closely in recent years, and that's Oak Ridge. And each of those triangles is a 3-year average. The most recent one, based on 2014, 15, 16 data, drops below that red dashed line, and that's the newest national health standard. The black dashed line, that was the initial PM2.5 standard, and we met that in all areas, but then when EPA tightened the national standard in 2006, it was clear that we needed to do more in Oak Ridge. We were nervous for a while in the Eugene area, but those levels have stayed under the health standard. So this is from our website. These are the dials. We thought that the scale actually goes from 0 to 500, and we thought, based on the last 30 years of data, we would make our dials as easy to read as possible. So we just showed the 300 because our strategies are to try to keep levels below 100. That's the health standard, and to rarely go above that 100 level. So we thought 0 to 300 was plenty, and it was a very readable dial. But with that wildfire smoke, we had a number of days where we were pegged out, and the actual number was 400 and something, at least for the 12-hour period of the day. But this was an actual day, September 6th. We were up into the unhealthy for general public area of the red on the dial for all 3 of our areas. Eugene Springfield is actually based on 4 different monitors. Oak Ridge and Cottage Grove were also up there. Normally, in the summer, this is August and early September, normally these would be green every day, maybe an occasional yellow if we had a high day and ozone crept up. We'd be, but mostly green, occasional yellow, and so this year was unusual that we had the orange, red, and purple days. The peak days, peak day I think was September 4th and 5th when we were up there in the, actually 3rd, 4th, 5th, that Labor Day weekend was when we had our highest levels, 240, 250. And it impacted a big chunk of Western Oregon. On another day, it might impact Eastern Oregon more, and some the other days it might impact Montana more. But those forest fires were impacting someone virtually nonstop. This is what we like to see from Skinner Butte. You can see way out to the Coast Range, and visibility is probably 20 miles or more. That's a good air quality day. This is a so-so day looking south towards Spencer Butte. You can see Spencer Butte, that's 5-mile visibility. That means air quality is moderate or better. I think it might have been actually good on this day, but right at the good to moderate edge. So 5-mile visibility is an encouragement that there's no problems even for sensitive people. But this is what we had on some of those days during that Labor Day weekend. You're looking towards Spencer Butte, but of course you can't see it. In fact, you can't even see College Hill 2 miles away. On this particular day, you couldn't even see eastward to see Hodson Stadium, which is only about a mile from Skinner Butte. And that's when air quality is up in those red ranges. This is a tool that Forest Service and other forest land managers have put together to describe not only where fires are, but where the smoke is forecasted to be. This has been a very helpful tool for us. There are calls multiple days a week during the bad periods where everybody was getting updated on where the areas of most concern were going to be that day or the next day. We, fortunately, with people like Joe and others in our office in recent years, we've expanded our use of social media. We found that was a very helpful tool to get the word out. We got reposts of many of our Facebook or our tweets by weather stations or others, and so we had good dispersal of information. It helped get information out where if we were reliant on just phones or personal contacts, we would have been just overloaded and not been able to do any of the other parts of dealing with this episode. Our monitors, if people look deeper on our website, they can look at the actual levels in each of the several monitors that we have throughout the area. This is, again, that Labor Day weekend, which if you look at the tail out there, September 9th or so, that's where levels should be that low or lower. But this was a very unusual year. Normally I don't show tables. Just like a picture's worth 1,000 words, a graph is worth 1,000 numbers, so I much prefer graphs. But here, just to focus in on some of those bullets down at the bottom, normally we get about 1,300 web hits a day. During this period of time, we on September 5th, we were actually 300 times the normal number of web hits. The last couple bullets, normally our website gets used about 10 hours a day. We were up at 5810 hours on our peak day, or almost 600 times the normal amount of website use. So fortunately, we had updated our website here in recent years, and I'm going to have to do that again now that dial was pegged out at the 300 level. But that helped get that information out to people very quickly.
And Merlin, I'll commend you on your social media outreach. I think you brought a lot of people in through social media.
Yes. We got, Joe can talk about it with more authority than I can, but we certainly, the number of likes, the number of site visits that we had, the number of comments that we received were really very unusual.
It was brilliant. Well done.
Thank you. This is a very helpful thing that the school districts here were using, and you can use this either with our air quality index, the color codes of our air quality index, or you can use that visibility that I mentioned. If you could see Spencer Butte, that's a pretty relaxed situation. If you're up in Marcola and you don't have an air monitor right there, but you have landmarks that you know are 1, 2, 3 miles away, you can use this as a tool, and this gives guidance. And we had a number of school districts that postponed or relocated events during this period of time based on this guidance. Oregon Health Authority holds this together for Oregon School Activities Association. And NCAA is using something very similar to this in their guidance to University of Oregon or Oregon State as far as when they need to consider options as far as football games. Fortunately, air quality was good for the Nebraska game. It was bad before, it was bad after, but air quality was good. You can see.
Hey, that's me right there.
Well, this is just about before people are still gathering for the game, but actually U of O invited us to come in and monitor on site. Just in the problem days leading up to this, they wanted to be sure they had the best information, and they had us able to objectively communicate it to them. So they invited us to actually set up a temporary monitor there, which we did. This was some of the more gratifying part of this. These are some of the nicest comments I think we've ever heard at El Rapo. And Commissioner Farr, along the same line that you were describing, these were the kind of comments that we were getting on our Facebook page. And so it was nice to know that people were interested and were using the information, and appreciative of us doing the frequent updates that we did. So then here's Cottage Grove, very similar pattern. You can see Cottage Grove in the winter is even better than Oak Ridge, but it had wildfire smoke impacts similar to the rest of the area. Ozone is, I should probably...
I'm going to say you want to explain the blue dots.
Yeah. This has not just the yellow squares that have to do with particulate matter, but it also has blue, which is when ozone is the highest air quality index for a given day. And so in the summer months, it's usually ozone that drives the air quality index. We have an ozone monitor in Saginaw, and so we use that on this Cottage Grove summary. We also have ozone monitor in Amazon, south of Eugene. And those are, both Saginaw and Eugene are considered downwind of the Eugene-Springfield area and are the best place to measure ozone because it forms in the atmosphere, not directly emitted by different things. It forms in the atmosphere on those hot summer afternoons. Volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides are the emissions from cars and industries and homes that contribute to that. So on ozone, we've been fortunate to stay ahead of tightening federal standards. We've never actually triggered non-attainment for ozone. We've been able to improve at a rate that keeps us ahead of those tightening standards. The red dashed line here is the most recent standard. The last dots there, those are 3-year averages again, and those were influenced by the wildfire smoke on those hottest days. That can also exacerbate ozone formation, but not enough that we're in danger of violating the standard. We're expecting that to come back down as we get past this season, unless this is a continuing wildfire smoke problem. This is the third and final graph. This is Eugene-Springfield. You can see in the winter, it's kind of in between Cottage Grove and Oak Ridge as far as the number of days that get close to the standard, but it was also heavily impacted by wildfire smoke. You can also see the blue dots. That represents the Amazon monitoring site for ozone. So this now gets more closely related to the open burning situation. This is the complaint summary that the board sees every month. We try to give them a decade of perspective as part of this, not just the last column, which is the year-to-date. And this is through, I believe, through September. So the year-to-date on that last column is 9 months of the year. But all of these complaint categories are either low and steady or else they're declining, which is what we want, except for 2. And those 2 are open burning and HWH, which is home with heating. So those are the 2 categories that, from a complaint standpoint, are of greater concern. Another category that's noteworthy is miscellaneous, and we're getting a number of things showing up there. Some of those are odors from marijuana growing operations. We're also getting, surprisingly, the mill in Halsey, under certain wind conditions, can impact significant parts of West Eugene. And we've done odor crawls. John typically is the one taking people with him and able to trace that odor back to Halsey. And it's surprising, but just under the certain wind conditions with the steady wind, we can have a number of complaints from West Eugene from that.
Out in Bethel, that's where we all remember the Weyerhaeuser days back in the 80s.
Is that full?
Yes. Yeah. It's the Cascade Pacific pulp mill in Halsey. So it's actually outside Lane County. We work with DPQ to make sure they're giving it the proper attention. But it shows up under our we still track complaints even if we forward them to somebody else for action.
So on the open burning complaints, Merlin, how many of those are actually like complaints for burning out of season or burning on prohibited days versus just about somebody burning illegally? Do you have any idea?
John, how would you characterize? John's involved with many of those.
I'd say roughly 75% would be relative to people that are burning legally. Or, well, okay. So we get quite a few prohibited material complaints. So I guess,
They might be burning on a legal day, but burning
yeah, so.
something illegal.
Yeah. But most of them come during the open burning season.
Yeah, because I've seen the monthly reports, I've seen open burning complaints come in the summertime, which amazes me.
Yeah.
They do. And it's just
Many of those are the burn barrel situation where people think that it's not open
Yeah.
because they have their barrel and a screen on top. And we also get referrals from fire departments in the summertime for illegal burning. So, but most of them are during the burn season.
So prohibited materials would be like if people are burning garbage or plastics or things that emit black smoke or heavy smoke.
Tires are okay though.
Or OSB. Yeah. You can't burn, composite building materials. Right. Certain building materials.
So violations can be for burning those prohibited materials or burning on a day that's not allowed or burning outside the time that it's allowed. The forecast prescribes what time of day people can burn so that when the ventilation is best and least likely to impact neighbors.
And Merlin, you know Alex Kyle. Alex does our jurisdictional work. He has a question.
Thanks, Ron. I just thought it would be important, we did a bunch of work up on behalf of Oak Ridge for trying to get some additional resources up there from this DEQ fund. Is there an exception that, Oak Ridge has done a good job of trying to get out of, what's the term?
Non-payment.
Yeah. So how do the fires impact that? Is there an exception that they can take?
There's an exceptional event process
Okay.
that we haven't had to use in Lane County in my memory. But this year we will, at least for Oak Ridge and possibly for Eugene as well. But it's designed exactly for this situation.
So it won't ding them over the long run.
Right, yeah. But it is a process we have to go through, and we're going to be working with Oregon DEQ because we're going to be lumping many sites throughout the state together as part of that proposal.
Thanks, Alex.
Enforcement actions are also dominated by open burning. The two big categories are enforcement actions are either open burning or asbestos violations. Industry, home heating, fugitive dust, significant numbers, but small in comparison to open burning. So that's what the Citizens Advisory Committee was looking at, and so that's why they worked with staff to make a number of recommendations to improve the program. So we started with ceremonial fire. The board back in 2008 allowed an exception for ceremonial fires. It was based on a request from Native Americans for certain things that they did requiring fires, and the board was receptive to that. We had what was considered by many to be an abuse of that in the event over on the coast, over by Tidewater, the Burning Man situation over there. And of course, there's other problems that you all were involved with, grappling with at that time. But this was something that it looked like an opportunity to tighten the rules where it would address that kind of situation and not have it open that somebody's going to claim, well, this is just a ceremonial fire. And so the El Rapa board asked the advisory committee to look at that. They came back and recommended that a rule change that small ceremonial fires, keep that just if it's recreational fire size, but if it's larger than that, we have a provision in our rules about bonfires that requires a letter permit. It requires coordination with the local fire district. It makes sure that fire safety issues are addressed as well as air quality. And when it was clear that it was going to require a rule change, the board asked the Citizens Advisory Committee to since it had been several years since we had updated our rules, to go back through pretty comprehensively. And well, what other rule changes? If we take this out, what other rule changes would you recommend at this time?
Merlin, if I may, Typically, we would have a agenda packet associated with our agenda on this, and we don't today. So people will be following online or on TV, perhaps. We're looking at Title 47 right now.
Yes, Title
which is
47.
on LRAPA's website.
Yes.
It's just lrapa.org, I believe.
Yes.
And then go to rules, and then Title 47 is the outdoor burning rules.
Yes.
And actually, if I may, if they want to actually see a board packet on it, if they go to the LRAPA board agendas, our September board packet had including the crosswalk that walked you through all the various changes, multiple pages of minor changes and all that. So if you want to go through and look at the individual detail,
Excellent.
look at the LRAPA board packet.
And
I'd also like to welcome the LRAPA board chair to our meeting.
Jeannie, good to see
Janine,
you.
how you doing? Janine Parisi.
And the board packet in October also has links to that material because that's the meeting the board actually adopted. And so maybe even more complete response to the comments that we received are part of that October packet. John mentioned about burning in barrels. We find that those are kind of a magnet for prohibited materials. And frequently, if we have a rental property and there's a burn barrel, we may have informed the previous renter about that it's not to be used for prohibited materials. It's only allowed on burn days. You can only use it for yard debris. And then we get a new tenant there, and they have a burn barrel in the backyard, and they assume that that's what that's for is for burning. So what the advisory committee recommended was a ban on burn barrels. That's been done statewide in Washington in recent years as well, for the same reasons. Grass clippings are actually a prohibited material because there's no way to burn grass clippings without excessive smoke. But they recommended that we specify grass clippings specifically as a prohibited material. Burning of fallen leaves is also difficult to do without heavy smoke, and so they recommended within city limits that be prohibited. And then the last bullet was the one that we most wanted to talk to you about before the board considers action on that, and that's to prohibit outdoor burning in the UGB around Eugene. This is a property breakdown within the UGB. There's about 371 properties that can currently burn because they're greater than a half acre. So on given, there's a short season in the fall. Usually it's October or a portion of October, and then also in the spring, March, April, May, that they can burn. And so the proposal would be to ban burning on those properties. This, just to give you an idea of the north-south, the area we've been most concerned about is the north area because that's the patchwork of city and unincorporated areas in the Santa Clara River Road area. So we had meetings with both of those community organizations, River Road and Santa Clara, and there was more support, at least in the people that attended those meetings, there was more support for tighter burning restrictions because if they were bothered more by the smoke, then they felt it was important to keep burning as one of the options for cleaning up yard debris. Over the years, there's more options with Rexius or Lane Forest products where people can haul their material in for disposal. If you break it down by larger properties, we had someone testify at the public hearing that had property, I believe, of about 8 acres. And so that would be relatively a small number of properties. They were from South Eugene area, and they were concerned about that would be burdensome for cleanup, especially after a storm event like we had this past spring. We also had a number of people that were very supportive of this ban in the urban growth boundary.
I'm sorry, Merlin, and I maybe missed this. What about properties less than half an acre? They're already
It's already banned.
Right.
Yeah. And in the urban growth boundary, both Eugene and Springfield, it's banned totally during November to February. So that's why I say there's fire safety, it prohibits it in the summer months. There's a burning season in October, and then March, April, May in spring. So this would eliminate those 4 months. So it would be a total prohibition on open burning within the UGB around Eugene.
Question, does Eugene offer a leaf and limb pickup, spring and fall type of program for folks to put their leaves out and their limbs?
Yes, there is the city, and also the county has some parts of the area that there's leaf pickup. There's curbside pickup for smaller quantities of yard debris. So this would be more the bigger stuff.
I'm thinking right now with all the leaves falling that if there's the ability for the citizen to gift those to the county or the municipality.
We do that in the River Road Center area specifically, but in other areas as well we do.
And Food for Lane County is often the happy recipient.
So, next steps, or just kind of review some of the stuff. Air quality trends generally been good. We have to go through this exceptional event process to address the wildfire smoke issues. The 2 complaint categories that we've been focused on, outdoor burning and homewood heating. Homewood heating maybe for a different day, or actually it was an earlier day, about a year ago, when Mayor Jim Coey came in and asked the county to adopt in the urban growth boundary around Oak Ridge similar homewood heating restrictions so that the requirements were consistent. And you all did follow through on that as the mayor requested. So outdoor burning is our focus today. That's where most of our enforcement actions are. We've taken the advisory committee recommendations to the board. The board adopted most of those, essentially all of those except for the Eugene UGB, but that's maybe the most significant of the recommendations that's still to be addressed. So that's kind of a brain dump on a variety of things, but to at least set the stage for conversation here.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the presentation. Commissioner Bozovich has spent a lot of years on your board, and I spent a tiny little time. Commissioner Bozovich asked me to cover for about a quarter of a year, I think. So Jim.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the reasons I asked Merlin to come and present to us, and one of the reasons I asked for them to separate the burn ban inside CGD from the rest of the rules is it's really an area where this is county jurisdiction, not really city of Eugene jurisdiction, and I really wanted to hear from the rest of the board what you all thought of that. We got significant testimony from several large property owners about their inability to keep their property maintained without having the ability to open burn, particularly one in the South Hills that has it's completely forested property that's steep, and trying to haul to where they can actually load out and get the Lane Forest products is unreasonable. And he said particularly after the ice storm last winter, it was, he's barely gotten through cleaning up a third of his property and compiling it and getting a chance to burn. So that was, the level of concern was, charging ahead on something that really I hadn't had a chance to talk to you all about, and particularly you cover part of the area that's of concern. Pete covers part of the area. In fact, the property owner that was of concern is one of your constituents that came and testified against having the ban. And somebody you probably know pretty well, a local attorney that lives up there. So it's kind of a question of, is this something we want to move forward with? Is it a total ban, or do we want to, maybe just make the size of the parcel a little smaller? What do you recommend that I carry forward to the El Rapa board? Because it is kind of an all or nothing solution in some ways. And yes, there is some curbside yard debris pickup in the Eugene area. It's not available to everyone, and it's not a weekly pickup. I had it when I lived inside River Road, and I constantly was exceeding capacity in my yard to rebuild, but I had a third of an acre lot, let alone, an acre. It was really easy to generate that much yard debris. Relief pickup is available, but it doesn't do anything for limbs and some other yard debris you generate. So just kind of looking for some guidance from the board.
So my question, if I may, the topic this morning is specific to the urbanized area of Eugene and the urban growth boundary, not in the farther reaches of the county.
Correct. Well, actually, let me be specific. It's from the city limits to the UGB.
Okay.
Yeah. Inside the city limits, that's city jurisdiction, and they have their rules that they have set. And that's kind of we're in this gray area between the UGB and the city limits. And unless it's land use, it's really our jurisdiction. And land use, we have a joint, co-adopted master plan, through the Metro plan that we deal with that, and we also have IGAs about land use. But this is not land use. This is, a completely different issue. So it is completely within the county's jurisdiction, but then we're talking about that donut between city limits and UGB.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking at your board packet from October 12th. And so your recommendation to the board then was to adopt the version without the UGB language?
Yeah, and that was done.
And that was done. I presume that was the case.
So burn barrel's been taken care of, grass clippings, and some other issues.
Those attachments are linked also. I don't know if it's clear with the color there, but if you click on the attachment one or the
Oh, okay,
AGC,
good. Yeah.
and so the response to comments would be part of that attachment one. The crosswalk that Jay mentioned is
There it is. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. So your recommendation, Jay, is that
From my personal experience of having an acre and a third now out in the country, there's no way I could handle my yard waste without having the ability to burn. It's one of those things. Of course, being on the El Rapa board, I'm really careful. Tarp my pile so it stays dry and only burn on call before I burn and all that good stuff. So it's always. But I had a neighbor that constantly burned grass clippings. It was just infuriating for a while. And no matter how many times I mentioned it to him, but he was one of those people that was infuriating to start with. Tried to set up an illegal campground for the country fair on his property at one point. And eventually got foreclosed on and evicted. But there are always those. But and that's where you're getting. I know I called El Rapa long before I was ever even a commissioner, specifically on that neighbor. And you guys came because he was burning OSB that day.
But it's okay to burn like pressure treated lumber, right?
Yeah. No. In general, just stay away from building debris. You should be safe.
Yeah, I think so.
Stick with woody yard debris, dry woody yard debris, and you're in good shape.
What's a little copper arsenate in the soil?
Yeah. We did get a fair amount of pushback testimony. Of course, there's a lot of people that are highly sensitive to any smoke in the air and don't want any burning at any time. And if they had, if it was up to them, there'd be a complete burn ban for it. Fireplaces, you name it. So you hear from both sides of the spectrum. As I look at the chart of the size parcels and all that, maybe the compromise is to go up to an acre, and it eliminates a lot of properties in size and leaves some of those larger parcels, particularly in the South Hills, which is, if you looked at the difference between the north of west of 11th and south of 11th, the bigger parcels were all south, which means they're all steep and in the woods. Because they're on that on the ridge line, pretty much abutting the ridge line for the most part. So that's letting those property owners still be able to manage their properties. Because, one of the balance to this is wildfire, and particularly in the South Hills, is that ability to burn those ladder fuels and ground fuels is wildfire prevention. And we just saw what wildfire does to our air quality. We've had our worst air quality days in wildfire situations, so there's kind of that balance there.
I think you nailed it right there. That is so important.
Yeah. So, for me, I don't know if you can go back to the slide where it has a parcel size, because you might be able to look at that and kind of think about, you go from 371 parcels to 123, just to go up to an acre plus. And I think that's kind of about where you hit the size where it's really hard to manage yard debris, depending on what kind of, forest canopy and whatever else. And I don't have a lot. I've got a small orchard in my yard that generates probably enough that I need more. Just keeping the trimming from the orchard. Yeah. So that, fortunately, I got rid of all my pine trees because the beetles killed them. That was generating the majority of my waste.
That's it.
So I appreciate you bringing that chart back up, and when you get to see the numbers of the actual numbers of a half acre compared to an acre, and then of course on up. One of the things in the one thing you cannot predict is what's going to happen weather-wise. You just can't do that. I mean, that's why they say the meteorologists, what are they, 80% correct? I mean, there's 20% they miss. And I think the ice storm is a really good example, because the ice storm primarily affected Eugene and had very little to no effect in Springfield. And yet we're separated by a freeway. So I'm 10 miles from my home in Thurston to come here, and driving through Springfield on 126, it was no issue. I come here, driving across Ferry Street Bridge, and all of a sudden you're going, whoa, what happened? And you think you're in a completely different country, and let alone state. And so I think
We've thought that for years.
you brought that up, and I did. And so now that you mention that, I'm going to go ahead and talk about Eugene Springfield. No, I'm just kidding. So, I think So I like, Jay, where you're going on this. I think you have to be a little bit flexible there, and I don't think you can do an outright. But in looking at that, the half acre, there's not an issue there. But then you get into those larger sizes, and especially when you mentioned the South Hills, that's a really good example, because you don't have necessarily great access with debris, and the cleanup that was occurring, the cleanup was significant that occurred during that ice storm. I'm talking to Sheriff Trapp. He lives out Camp Creek, Upper Camp Creek Road.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're having to go 10 miles an hour here because it's slick, and Upper Camp Creek Road is 55 miles an hour, and nothing. No ice whatsoever. And it's a strange thing to see that. And no trees down, nothing during that same period. And so I think having that flexibility, and not putting an outright ban, but instead looking at really the area, the location, and the size, and how much people have access, to me makes sense. So I appreciate those comments. I think that those are good comments, because you can't determine what the weather will look like. That was the strangest weather pattern I think I've ever seen, because you're only 5 to 10 miles apart, and yet you felt like you were 100 miles apart. So that's just my thought.
And now from the other world, Pete.
Let me ask a couple of local questions, and then maybe some bigger questions, national questions. On the local level, it seems like there's been a lot more interest in trying to utilize this material in some positive way. In other words, think about Rexius or Lane Forest products, where people can take yard debris to them and have it ground up and used in some way. And yet, if you look at the different property sizes there, 123 properties in the urban growth boundary with more than an acre. That's a lot of material, at least as we're hearing. That's just a lot of work for the homeowner to get that material burned or get it hauled off. Is there any future, any idea that material is going to be useful? Maybe an analogy would be the elimination of the wigwam burners that resulted in an expansion of the pulp industry in Oregon. Is there something for people like me that are hauling stuff off of a third of an acre as opposed to people that have several acres?
I think we're well set for everything being able to be utilized. Even just the Rexius and Lane Forest Products sites that can be used for yard debris. That can be used in some cases. They process that for wood fuel. These properties would probably not be of a size that like Seneca would be interested, but they, in the forest slash, if it's a reasonable haul distance, they are hauling that forest slash into for fuel. They're at the biomass plant to generate electricity.
Well, would these properties be eligible for that too?
Well, the question there is the economy of scale. It has to be reasonably convenient distance-wise and then access when you get to the site and enough material for it to be reasonable return on that transportation investment. I would not expect these small properties, maybe a rare case, except for rare case, to be an option. But the multiple sites at Lane Forest Products and also Rexius, they're set up to utilize it. It's just a matter of getting it there. That's the challenge. Now, the steep slopes that's been mentioned, and then you have to have a pickup. Larger properties probably tend to have the pickup part of it. Maybe not all cases, but many cases.
Yeah, so they don't have many trips.
Yeah, and now on the bigger end, there hasn't been a lot of talk about the Clean Air Act and the impact of changing regulations under that law. I've been pretty appalled at some of the things the Trump administration officials have said, and I'm just curious whether any of that rhetoric about getting rid of government regulations and letting business do what they want to do, whether any of that has been trickling down to the actual daily work of the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency.
Well, historically, I've been very frustrated by red tape. More recently, I've come to appreciate that some of that red tape is part of the checks and balances in our systems. And so we have to be at least as stringent as state requirements. State requirements have to be at least as stringent as federal. So just changing federal requirements doesn't automatically change things for our ability, or certainly it would take local action to agree that was a good change. And then in Congress too, when we're talking about budgets, there's been pretty dramatic slashing of EPA budget proposed. Some of that, but those dollars get passed to state and local agencies. But Congress, they understand the importance of those funds.
Have there been any changes in the approximately 10 months of the Trump administration and Congress in terms of funding or relieving you of burdens that you wanted to have relieved, or giving you more things to do that you didn't want to do? Has there been any change?
There's probably slower progress getting things approved is one, just because there's a lot of unfilled positions. As far as the funding that gets to state and local agencies, that has been unchanged, and that was more a decision by Congress to keep it at the same level. So we have not had a reduction in federal funding. EPA's budget, I understand, has been reduced by, I believe, single digits. I think the proposal was like a third or 30-some% reduction. But when that was approved by Congress, it was just a few percent reduction. But the pass-through funds that are most concerned to us, those have been unchanged to date.
Okay, thank you so much.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you. A couple of things occurred to me and that Commissioner Sorensen brought up about the use of these materials. I can use Cottage Grove as a great example of really good practice. In the fall, they collect the leaves, and the city actually uses those as a mulch and other components. In the springtime, they have a limb pickup, so two separate entities here. Those limbs are collected in about a 2-week window, just put out at the curb. And we in Cottage Grove pick up dozens and dozens of pickup loads of woody debris, which is then sequestered at the county or the city shops. And annually we bring in a tub grinder and grind all that material is put in our parks and open spaces for improvements and enhancements. And it is a great program. It's worked very, very well. My own experience is when I've missed that window of opportunity to put things out at the curb, I load up my truck and simply take it to the city shops and add to their pile. There's no charge to that. So it's one of those practices that I've found to be extremely convenient, because I'm one of those folks that really, the change of the season from summer to autumn was go burn a pile of limbs and leaves. And I was pretty resistant to change for a number of years, but 3 or 4 years ago, because there was this alternative presented, took advantage of that. And I see that there is a lot less smoke this time of the year in Cottage Grove, because there are other opportunities for people to dispose of that. So just a comment of what I think is an excellent practice and a great model for other communities or areas to look into and adopt.
And I think you're ahead of most communities with that in Cottage Grove. For myself, I have a 6,500 square foot lot with a lot of trees. I find myself hauling stuff at least twice a year on a little tiny lot. So it's a service that recycling is what it is basically.
If I may, oftentimes when there is an authorized window for collecting and doing whatever you do with woody debris on your property, most people, if it's raining and really nasty weather in that 2-week window, it's not going to get done. People tend to do that when the weather is a little bit nicer and they think, I'm going to go take care of this, and they end up with a pile of stuff. But they missed the window and of a uniform collection system. And so that's another one of those little pieces of the puzzle. And I was guilty of that, where once a year or so I would go out and have a pretty vigorous activity, and I have a third of an acre in Cottage Grove. But it is one of the densest urban forest areas in the entire city. The 10,000-foot view of Google Earth and my lot is pretty amazing.
Well, I live in Bethel, and if you look at all the collection maps, Bethel is always the last. So usually the leaves are gone by the time it's collected in Bethel have blown or mulched into the ground. So today, Jay, we have, you guys passed version 2, I would guess. That's the version 2, which is the red line version. That's what the board passed. Do we need to take any action today? Would you recommend anything?
Well, I'm just looking for, because it's a work session, just looking for some guidance. We'll take action in the next LRAPA meeting probably on this particular issue of the open burning within the Eugene, UGB, and city limits, that boundary there. I'm just kind of looking for some guidance to come back to the board that I can report back to the rest of the LRAPA board of what you all thought.
My personal observation as a short period as your board member is that your staff provides such great information and the board is able to make very deliberative decisions based upon recommendations of the staff. I'm not inclined to disagree with what your board has recommended, what your board passed. So for me, Jay, you've got my support on the direction that you're headed with that.
On the 1 acre up, kind of.
Yeah.
So, thanks. I appreciate that direction. And if you give me a chance, I'd just like to address some of Commissioner Sorensen's concerns. I think, Merlin did a great job kind of saying, we have to be at least as strict as DEQ. DEQ's got to be at least as strict as EPA. And the state of Oregon is actually looking at going beyond EPA in some areas. And particularly, I've been on the Cleaner Air Oregon Advisory Committee for rulemaking, and they're looking at getting ready to do a bunch of air toxics regulations in the state of Oregon. In fact, the Environmental Quality Committee is meeting this week here in Eugene, and I'll be giving some testimony, I think, on Friday briefly to them. But there is, even though there's changes of administration in Washington, there's still a state agency that's led by a state government that can actually go beyond the federal government. And this is kind of goes back to the bullseye glass and some of the issues in Portland around air toxics and getting more of a statewide set of rules in place for air toxics, which, I know you said Joe's veteran at 3.5 years, kind of stepped right into trial by fire, because it was like shortly after Joe started, we had bullseye glass and, all sorts of other things that,
Swanson Mill burnt down.
Yeah.
The Section Creek fire impacting Oak Ridge.
Yeah, just a few things that have kept Joe busy, and then the fires. So she was well prepared for the fire, the smoke intrusions this summer, because she'd already been dealing with so much on the PR side that had her prepared for that. So, so there is that. We are, one of the great things is we're allowed to be more strict. And in fact, and LRAPA can be more strict than the state. So as the states start to adopt Cleaner Air Oregon rules, we'll have to adopt rules that are at least as strict and here locally. So that's coming in the future is air toxics regulations for this area and some kind of monitoring enforcement program that will come with that permitting.
I'll corroborate that. My last couple of years in the Eugene City Council, when Andre Ortiz was under board, you came and made a pretty enormous presentation to the City Council regarding the value of all that. And it was at that point that I heard that your regulations go beyond DEQ, that you do things that DEQ would never imagined doing. And at the time, there was some speculation as to whether or not we needed regional air pollution authority. Well, that speculation dissolved, at least to me, and I know kind of universally. So what you're saying, Jay, is that really LRAPA goes beyond state, which goes beyond federal. So we're kind of honing it down to an exact science. We're talking about Oak Ridge very specifically, and Cottage Grove very specifically, and you were just talking about West Eugene very specifically. So we're able to really hone in on tightly regional issues that vary immensely from one side of Lane County to the other. Please.
And if I may, I'd just like to thank everyone for having us here today to go over some of these issues. And like many other urban growth boundary and city boundary issues, it's something that I think will probably come across again with other cities. this particular outdoor burning issue has come up quite a few times in the River Road, Santa Clara neighborhoods where we have that awkward patchwork where some neighbors can burn through our rules and other neighbors cannot, regardless of their own acreage size, because they're limited by the city rules. And so those complaints come in, and it's more difficult for us to enforce that, especially since smoke itself doesn't know any boundaries and will go wherever it wants to go.
Not like fireworks.
Like fireworks, like wildfire. Like Jay said, my job security experiences with having a lot of PR work in this area. It's been really interesting getting the feedback from citizens, so I just wanted to encourage everyone to take a look at some of the public comment that we've received and our responses back to them. We had a few people show up at our initial public hearing, a few people more that wanted to show up that couldn't, so it was one of our more popular public hearings that we've had, an interesting one with lots of different perspectives. And we have even done an informal survey out into the River Road and Santa Clara neighborhoods just to see what people were thinking in those neighborhoods. And we were pleasantly surprised to find out that most people were for having a ban in the urban growth boundary in that specific neighborhood. We hadn't done as much looking into the South Eugene areas with a larger lot. So I think this was a good way to kind of hit pause on this button and revisit this issue from our board and get more perspectives. So please do follow up with us. We'll be coming to you again shortly, I'm sure, with other cities as they expand into the urban growth boundaries and rules change. And even if federal regulations change, I just want to assure you that our office is more dedicated to preserving public health and hopefully moving forward with having cleaner air in Lynn County.
Thank you. That's great. You know, I'll mention that we are just embarking on a very comprehensive, what's called a refinement plan for River Road, Santa Clara neighborhoods, which is the urban transition. And this will be a part of it, you know, part of the general picture. It's not just roads, it's not just land use, it's not just zoning and public safety, but it will also air quality and quality of life. So it's a very important issue, a very hot topic right now is how do we handle things inside the urban growth boundary, outside the city limits, to make it more consistent with their neighbors across the street, for instance. So thanks for the presentation on that. Anything further? Sounds as though you've got your head nods, if we will call it that.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll bring the discussion back to the LRAPA board, and we'll see where we go from there, because of course I'm only one vote on the board. But I can just tell you what I can give the input of the county commissioners to the LRAPA board. And Janine was here to hear the conversation, so she can also corroborate my
That's my
summary. Yeah, she's keeping me honest. Because she knows she has to. She kept me honest at eWeb, you know.
But I need to talk to you about water containers. I have one, I need another one, so we need to talk about
we
it.
can make that happen.
All right. And is Mike Fleck still on the board? Yes. So from Credit Grove, so good. We're well represented throughout the county. So. Anything else we can do for you today?
No. Yeah, we have.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you guys coming and making the time for it.
And your board packet is very thorough, so if anyone's watching, if you go to LRAPA's board packet from October 12th, contains all the information we're talking, all the presentations, including this chart we received today. So, thank you very much.
Good job on that.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So we'll take about a 5-minute.
We have a 10:30.
It's a 10:30. Okay, so
Do you want to recess to 10:30 or?
Well, I think that's probably what we should do because I know Jacob Fox is going to be here probably around 10:30. Norton's already in the room.
I thought it was at 10. Is it not until 10:30?
10:30, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
And I may have, you may have got that.
No problem.
Yeah, I think the home builders and some of the other people that are interested.
Yeah.
Is John coming too?
Yeah.
Good.
And I think you will have Mr. Member Heisky back at 10:30 as well.
Now we don't need more. Right? Fine.
You're doing good.
Okay, so
Screw anything up.
we will recess until approximately 10. Let's not make it approximate. 10:25. We'll be back. beautiful. Back in session, but we did have a 10:30 time certain, so we'll be more informal until 10:30 or so. So we're chatting with the members of the audience about housing and how it pertains to Oregon and Virginia. November 1st, 2017, reconvene in time for a 10:30 time certain. We have a couple of minutes before the time certain begins, and Steve Mokaisen will be joining us.
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting, I just thought I'd mention there is an Emerging Leaders Program at the University of Virginia in partnership with the, and I'm sure they wrote this, the Distinguished Darden School of Business. And I don't know how many county commissioners apply for such thing, but I think it's worthwhile, and it's a good program. Senator Susan Castillo went to this program. I went to this program, and they select one person from each state each year to go. And it's a month-long program in Charlottesville, and really worthwhile. And they have a definitely multi-partisan approach. They don't. It's not dominated by any one political party, and it's really quite good. And the Darden School is really excellent place to hold it, and the faculty there is about a third of the total faculty. So.
Well, one of the cool things about the university is if you walk through the apartments right on campus, you get to see Edgar Allan Poe's still furnished apartment. And then there are folks in the room who've lived in Baltimore, which is not too far away.
Nevermore.
Nevermore.
Yes, and the fact that there's a bottle appears on his grave every year. In Baltimore, I've been to his grave site in Baltimore.
All right. Well, we are assembled and ready for our 10:30 time certain. Okay, item 1B on the morning's agenda is a work session discussion regarding the adoption of a residential commercial construction tax to support low-income housing. And Mr. Mokaisen, excuse me, today we have Steve Dingle with the presentation. Mr. Mokaisen.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. So this was an issue I think that was first raised by or suggested by Commissioner Sorensen, and I prepared an agenda cover memo and attached the actual Senate Bill 1533. And at everyone's, I think a number of commissioners suggested that certain individuals be invited to offer their different perspectives on this. And so I invited everyone. I know there's some realtor groups, home builders associations, and some, I guess, just generically speaking, affordable housing advocates, as well as Mr. Fox from HACSA. And I assumed that really what the board wanted to do at this point was sort of information gather and get folks' perspective on this. I have done some sort of just generally looking at some of the other folks that jurisdictions that have it. And it's generally, I think, the issues are the ones that I think were identified when this was first raised. The sort of tension between the money that you raise also raises the cost of the housing, because the builders directly pass the cost through to the person. So I don't know how you want to handle this. I know we've got a number of folks lined up here, and I'd also like to say we met with the City of Eugene just informally yesterday. They're also considering or examining this, so they're a little bit further down the in the process, and I know that they've got some factual information if you're interested.
Excellent.
Will you look at that one sheet that you talked about, the one that...
I'll catch you in just a second.
Okay.
So we have the discussion today. This is at the request of Commissioner Sorensen, but received head nods directly from the entire board. And today, then, in the room, we do have a number of individuals who have joined us. Stephanie Jennings from the City of Eugene, Norton Cabell, and John Van Landingham, who are on the Housing Policy Board. Jacob Fox with our Housing Community Services Agency, HACSA, and Ed McMahon, who is the CEO of Home Builders Association. Say again?
Would they like to join us at the table?
Well, without objection, I will ask you to join us at the table. This is a work session, and since we are gathering, Commissioner Sorensen, without...
Well, that was what I was going to suggest. So
we're on the same wavelength. So then, let's talk about a ground rule for the discussion. I think discussion is open to anyone. We'll just go through a queue the way we normally would with the Board of County Commissioners, and we have expert testimony providers in the audience. So, Mr. Mulcair, I see a little bit of a deviation from a normal work session, but this is an important issue. Commissioner Sorensen, do you still need a...
I was just going to say that Commissioner Lycan was on the Housing Policy Board for a number of years, and I was asked to substitute in. At least I agreed to do it for a year. We're still on that year-long experiment. And I thought it's a really excellent group of people, leaders in the community. It is a great effort has been made by Mr. Cobble and the other folks here to involve a wide variety of people, rural, urban, Eugene, Springfield, etc. And I thought that it's been a really great experience to work with these folks. And on this topic, I think that the group has been exploring the opportunity that exists under the state law. And I'm just really pleased that we're going to learn a lot more about it today.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. And I'll say there's a lot of longevity in the room. In 1995, Ruth Bascom appointed me to the HPB, and I sat on the HPB, and you guys were...
we were there too.
And you weren't
all
newbies
gray
at the
hair.
time either, so that's 22 years ago. So we have a great deal of history sitting in the room with us. Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. Mr. Dingman.
Again, I don't know how you want to do this. I thought we'd just kind of go around the table and ask folks. What I understood from the request, aside from the, I thought maybe it'd be more effective to hear from them and then maybe answer some specific questions about how this would work and some of the different options. But I really thought that initially, I know the individual commissioners wanted to hear from folks sort of on all sides of the issue about what they thought about the excise tax, whether it was a good idea, bad idea, how much it should be, those sorts of things.
Excellent. Then, the other thing I was hoping that we could talk about is precedent. Inside the state right now, there are a number of jurisdictions who either have already optioned for a CET or that are considering at this point in time. So if anybody can give us a little bit of a rundown on what's happening there and any historical data surrounding that. So then I'll open it to the commissioners first. Questions or comments to begin the conversation.
Just want to make note, we did receive a letter from the Board of Realtors, the Eugene Association of Realtors, I should say. Elliot Blake, president, sent us a letter expressing their appreciation for asking for their input, but they kind of are I guess I could probably read the letter, but generally not in favor of the construction excise tax and more in favor of looking for solutions that would expand supply, like allowing accessory dwelling units in rural residential situations, just so that input's there and is available. And I think it was sent to go back and look to see which email address they used. Yeah, they use our public email address, so if anyone wants to see it, they can see it at the terminal that's in our lobby, the commissioner's lobby, and it's available to the public. So that information's on the record from the Eugene Realtors.
Excellent. Then I will make a mention that Mr. McMahon provided testimony yesterday during the public comment section of the regular board meeting. No public comment section today, but instead we are including the folks who can provide information right at the table. So we do have, if you're watching this online, go to our agenda today, click on view material, and you'll receive a package of information that we've received from our legal counsel. In that we're a little bit in new ground here, I'm not at a loss to how to begin, but does anybody want to start? John Van Lanningham.
Since I've been doing this longer than most anybody else, 40 years as of last month, as of September. So I'm John Van Lanningham. I work as a lawyer for a nonprofit called Lane County Legal Aid, although we recently merged with the Oregon Law Center. And a lot of my time these days is spent in Salem advocating on behalf of tenants and affordable housing. And I was not in the room, but standing outside the door of the room when the deal was negotiated on Senate Bill 1533, which changed the rules on construction excise taxes. The only people in the room were the Speaker's housing policy advisor, the City of Portland's lobbyist, the home builders lobbyist John Chandler, and the realtors lobbyist Sean Gillians. And those are the people that negotiated what is now Senate Bill 1533. That was 2016. So prior to that bill passing, in 2007, home builders lobbied a bill through that preempted local governments from adopting a construction excise tax. So that was 2007. The only construction excise tax allowed then was one for school construction. And that had a sunset on it itself. The preemption had a sunset, which meant that the preemption on local government CETs was going to go away unless the legislature extended it or did something. Prior to 2007, the only local government that I'm aware of that did a CET was the city of Bend, which did it in consortium, in cooperation with home builders in Deschutes County. And it's a 0.1, not 1%, but 0.1%, 0.1 of 1% dedicated to affordable housing. It's generated quite a bit of money. Housing, of course, is cyclical, but a lot of money in Bend that's gone to affordable housing. I think that was adopted in something like 2001 in Bend. So the deal in 2016 allowed two things by local governments. A construction excise tax with most of the proceeds, not all of the proceeds, but most of the proceeds dedicated to affordable housing. Steve did a memo. I reviewed his memo. It's perfect. The facts are perfect. He's described what's allowed, what you could do if you choose to do it. 1% cap on a residential CET with all of the proceeds dedicated in some fashion to affordable housing. 15% has to go to the state for home building, for home ownership. The state has agreed with the advocates around the state that they'll send that back to that community. So if Lane County were to contribute, if it adopted a CET and contributed that 15%, it would come back to home ownership programs in Lane County. There is no cap on the commercial CET, so it's not just residential, it's also commercial development. There's no cap on that. So far, of the local governments that have adopted it, all but one have adopted that at 1%. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as a background. So the local governments that have, and the bill also allows inclusionary zoning, and that was the hard-fought issue, really. The CET was not as hard-fought legislatively as the inclusionary zoning requirement. The concept of inclusionary zoning is that you make home builders or builders include a certain number of affordable units, however they are defined, in any development. It could be a subdivision of single-family houses. It could be an apartment building. A number of cities in California have it. Maryland suburbs have it. Some other places have it. It's also preempted in Oregon by another bill that home builders lobbied through in the late 1980s. So people have been advocating for inclusionary zoning for a long, long time. People have been opposing it for a long, long time. The bill allows cities to do inclusionary zoning, but has some severe, maybe severe is an unfair word, has some restrictions on doing it. It's limited to buildings with at least 20 units in them, and it requires the local government to compensate the home builder in some fashion. It's unclear whether that's a dollar for dollar. A lot of the bill is unclear because it was negotiated in the back room. It didn't really go through a committee. So the only local government that's so far adopted inclusionary zoning is Portland. I sat in on some of the meetings in Portland where that proposal was developed. It's incredibly complicated. It's very staff intensive. The Housing Policy Board is unlikely to recommend that to the City of Eugene. Not to say that the City of Eugene might not want to do it. That's a different question. But our proposal right now doesn't include inclusionary zoning. The other cities that have done a CET are, Portland did it right out of the bat, as soon as it was allowed, which was June of 2016. So it's been in effect at the end of June in Portland at 1% for both residential and commercial. The other cities that have done it, I think in order, I might not have the order exactly right, but Corvallis was next. Corvallis did 1% on residential and 1.5% on commercial. And the development community, as I understand it, supported that, largely because Corvallis has a huge imbalance between housing and jobs. They've got a ton of jobs, not much housing. A lot of people commute from Lebanon and other towns into Corvallis. So I think the development community supported that 1.5% for the commercial CET in Corvallis. Other cities that have adopted it include are Cannon Beach and Newport. Tillamook County adopted it. I believe the realtors there opposed and have referred it to the voters, and I think it's on the ballot now. Although I'd also note that one of the Tillamook County commissioners who supported it is a realtor. The other two are Hood River County and Hood River City, and they share a housing authority, as Jacob leads ours, which also shares a city and a county. And the leader of that housing authority worked with both the city and the county to adopt CET in both places that's coordinated between the two of them. I think that's the background information. The Housing Policy Board, Norton is the chair of the Housing Policy Board. He can talk about our proposal. The mayor asked the Housing Policy Board to prepare a proposal for the council. We have no idea if and when it would be scheduled. It's going to be, we've got something we've developed with a committee that will go to the Housing Policy Board on Monday, and then it will go from there to the mayor.
And pardon me, just a quick question. You said Tillamook County adopted, and it's been referred. I had heard that Tillamook City did also. Is that correct?
I didn't hear that.
Okay, then maybe.
I mean, there are other cities. We've got a list of other cities. We've got a memo that we've been working on that lists other cities that are considering it, like McMinnville and Salem. There's quite a few cities that are looking at it.
And pardon me 1 second, Norton. You just entered the room. Could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, my name is Lori Hallberg, and I'm a new staff attorney at Legal Aid.
Legal Aid, okay.
Had trouble finding.
She's going to take my place when I finally escape.
Typically during a work session, I wouldn't put you on the spot like that, but we've asked some folks to join us at the table, which is not also atypical. So, thank you. Please.
So I'm Norton Cabell. As John said, I chair the Intergovernmental Housing Policy Board and have for more years than I can remember. And so the mayor did ask us, gosh, I'm guessing last spring, to consider what to do with Senate Bill 1533. And the Housing Policy Board created a task force, and we've been working on this and having numerous meetings over the last several months. And we fairly quickly decided that inclusionary zoning wouldn't work in Eugene, but that a construction excise tax would. We've looked at the ordinances around the state and have, drafted a recommendation which will go to the Housing Policy Board next Monday. Some of you all will be there. And then, assuming the Housing Policy Board blesses that or approves that or tweaks it or does whatever, that will then go to City Council for their consideration. I'd like to come at this from a different perspective, and that is my background as a landlord. And I'm a landlord in Eugene and have been for 30 years, and I deal with a very low-income population, with very challenged population, and I see the dearth of affordable housing in Eugene. I can't speak to the county because I have a property in Springfield, but basically I'm in Eugene. The dearth of affordable housing and the damage that inflicts on low-income families. I have a number of Section 8 tenants, and I love the Section 8 program because that enables those people to afford their housing. Of my non-Section 8 tenants, I would guess that well over 50%, perhaps 75%, are considered income burdened. They're spending more than 30%, many of them 50% on housing, and that's the best they can do in Eugene. So Eugene has a huge lack of affordable housing given the income structure in the city. And so it's never fun to adopt a new tax. Somebody's going to pay the tax. But I think that we would be able in Eugene to leverage that money in a way that it would have a huge impact on affordable housing in the city.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Norman. You know, we're all aware of the lack of front doors in City of Eugene, City of Springfield, Lane County in general. And we're seeking ways to add more front doors, whether it be through ADUs, whether it be through higher single-family, multifamily residential mix, whatever it may be. But one of the ways is to make housing more affordable, finding ways to make housing more affordable. Another way is to subsidize the existing cost of housing. So what we're talking about right here is a CET, which on the one hand would make new housing more expensive, and on the other hand would help subsidize people and potentially help build lower income housing potentially. So that's kind of the
tension.
Thank you. That's the right word. The tension. The balance that we're looking at here is how do we achieve that balance without one counterbalancing the other. And so at this point, I'll ask for more comments. But Mr. McMahon, would you like to?
Yeah. Thank you very much. First, do know, Commissioners, I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you. And let me start by asking the attorneys a question in the room on clarity on the bill. It was my understanding that the inclusionary zoning part was for multifamily only, not for single family.
So Ed is correct. The bill that passed, cities are allowed to adopt inclusionary zoning, but they can only require it in buildings of 20 units or more, rental housing. And so, how many of those are there in Eugene and Springfield?
Right.
Buildings of 20 units or more.
And
not
pardon my
projects.
interruption. It is buildings. It's not a development of 20 or more.
It's not a developed subdivision of 20 lots.
So basically, this is Portland.
Do know that a lot of what I say today is going to be my personal comments because I've not gone before my board to get an official stance on this. And do know that, as I mentioned yesterday, one of our primary goals is to be advocates for affordable housing for all citizens. We firmly believe that. We want to be part of the solution. One thing that I definitely want to protect is home ownership. I believe that's what gets families going with building equity. I also have evidence that children that are raised in a home ownership situation have a far better chance of success in life. And what I do know through our national methodology of the price out effect, as I mentioned yesterday, for every $1,000 increase in home price in the Eugene-Springfield area, 266 families can no longer be approved for their mortgage. So for every $1,000 price increase, 266 families are going to have to continue to rent and not purchase that first home. That is my primary goal, while I also want to do something toward affordable housing. So if we're talking about a 1% construction excise tax on single family, say an entry-level home in Eugene, about $240. We're talking about $2,400 here, and my simple math says that's close to 650 people that aren't going to be able to qualify for that mortgage anymore. And so, as I also mentioned yesterday, if you look at the housing market as a tubular balloon, and at the bottom's affordable housing, you release the pressure there, it simply pushes the pressure up to the next step. Now, I believe there is a solution, and this is where I'm going to go on my single beliefs and not the associations, okay? But it seems to me like inclusionary zoning for multifamily might make sense. It's going to supply the units that we desperately need. I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, but at 30% of that new multifamily unit would have to be affordable housing for so many years. And that would get the units on the market that we desperately need, especially when I see out-of-state developers like the HUD and Capstone and everything coming in doing a lot of the multifamily. Wouldn't it be great if 30% of the HUD is affordable housing right now? So that's one thing that personally I think could be a solution to our housing problem. And I also know that I have a lot of my members that do commercial work. However, a commercial excise tax will not prevent those families from buying their first home. And so that could be part of the problem too, or part of the solution. But in my opinion, and what I advocated for yesterday, is I feel like we could all come to a consensus that affordability is a community problem. And I don't understand why a community problem should be faced or placed on one industry to take care of it. If it's a community problem, let's have the community come together and solve this problem. I'd be more than happy to pay more taxes if everyone in the community were participating on it. I do have a problem with one industry being targeted, especially when it prevents first-time home buyers from getting into that first home.
Thank you, Ms. Romer. And if I may take a second to summarize, you're suggesting that supporting an inclusionary zoning for multifamily, 20 units or more in a single building or in a series of buildings.
Personally, right now, I think that could be a solution to the problem. Overall, I think the community should be participating, not individual segments of certain industries.
And then you're suggesting that a commercial CET on commercial buildings may be acceptable / appropriate. So basically what you're saying is single-family residences are where the home builders or you are disagreeing.
Yeah, that's where my heart is. Let's allow those young families to get into their first home. I know that a commercial excise tax would not do that, and I know that a multifamily inclusionary zone would not prevent that. So where I am at personally is maybe those are two solutions, but I still think that the solution should be a community, not just an individual industry.
Okay. Thank you. And, John, one of the first things I learned from y'all was back when Richie Wyman was kind of holding my hand, was the housing ladder. And I don't know that we use it, we call it that anymore. And at the top of that housing ladder is home ownership. And that's what Mr. McMahon is talking about, is young families getting their first home. So, Jacob, do you want to...
Sure. I don't have enough copies for everybody, but I'll start with the commissioners and then I can definitely have one for you. So I guess from my vantage point, a couple things. I would agree with Ed that this is a community problem, and I believe ultimately that the voters are going to play a role in helping us solve an extreme supply problem. And I also believe that we need as many tools in the toolbox as possible, including the construction excise tax. So let me just kind of lay out some of the data from our community, and then I want to talk more specifically about rural Lake County, where I think there's an extreme need that could be helped with the construction excise tax. But essentially what we need, bottom line, is over 11,000 units in this community to help stabilize low-income people and homeless people. Also on this page, when you take the mean renter wage in the community, they make $11.27 an hour. So in order to afford an apartment in our community, they would need to work almost 80 hours a week in just that roof over their head. If you turn to the back page, this is just some access-specific statistics. So we don't keep our waiting lists open continuously. We open them and close them because the community need is so great. But just a little bit of information. When we opened our Section 8 waiting list earlier this year, in 10 days we received about 4,500 applications, just slightly under. And that represents 8,800 humans, including a lot of kids. The lower one is just public housing that we own. Again, this is not just in Eugene, Springfield, this is all over Lane County. Right now we have 1,500 people on the waiting list, representing 3,300 individuals and humans. So I've spent some time, traveling around Lane County, most recently in Florence, and I think you guys got an update on that trip that I took. The cities and the citizens all over Lane County need our help. And the only way to do that is to have aggressive solutions around supply. And I recently, on Monday morning, met with John Brown, and he was showing me just the multifamily industry report, and I didn't get a chance to get a copy of that yet, but I'll share it with you all. Regardless of the income targets, there's no multifamily being built in Lane County, with the exception of the student housing spike that happened in 2016. So again, I feel like we need tools in our toolbox. I believe that this is an important tool. It's a tool that other communities around Oregon are implementing. And $800,000 a year is what I believe Steve's memo outlined as the possible funding pool that would result from the implementation of this tax. And for us, what that could mean is about 100 units. And just so you know how I got to that math, we usually, for a tax credit project of 50 units, have a gap of between $400,000 and $600,000. And this, and outside of the metro area, there's limited what I call gap funding for those projects. So this money could result in more units on the ground in places like Florence, Cottage Grove, and Crestwell, and I think that that's something we should take very seriously.
And may I just, you're talking specifically about multifamily units that are being added. And the number, Mr. Dingle, you provided, the 800,000 that Jacob suggested, that's based on all construction?
That was done, yeah. So what I did is I contacted land management and asked if there was, assume hypothetically in the last year there had been a 1% residential and a 1% commercial. What would it have, based on that, what would it raise? And I think I put it in here, it's 800, would have come out at $845,310.38. And just so you know, there was as I put in the memo, there was a little bit of confusion initially, and I think we found out that it wasn't just us, but the initial low number that came before the legislative committee was because people thought it was only 1% of the actual permit payments. It's not and that's not what it's intended for. It's the actual value. So that's why there's such a tremendous difference between the estimates about the amount of money that would be raised.
Is that the value as calculated by our assessment department?
Okay. Right. And it doesn't include just, it includes not only new construction, but also additional remodels.
Do you happen to have a breakdown on that as to how much of that is single-family residence, how much is commercial, and how much is multi? But as Jacob said, multis kind of don't have much going on other than student housing.
Yeah, no, I don't. And I don't know what the I just got that gross number, so I don't know what of that 845,000 plus, I don't know how much of that was the 1% came from the residential or the 1% that came from the commercial. I'm sure they could come up with that number of the 4 months.
And that may be a request before the end of this meeting, is that we do get a breakdown on that, depending on where the discussion goes at this point in time.
So just on that breakdown, my guess is the majority of that's residential, because when you're talking about Lane County permits, we don't permit very much commercial at all.
And that actually that's what they said.
So that's going to be probably 80 to 90% residentially generated.
And almost 100% of that single-family residential.
Yep.
Okay. Norm, go ahead. And then Stephen, I'm going to ask you to speak.
In the committee's deliberations, we were concerned also about the effect on affordable housing for first-time home buyers. And so we thought about, exempting, for example, the first $100,000 or so of the value from the tax. But the members of the committee, both from NEDCO and from St. Vincent's, who sponsor home ownership programs, they both said that really wasn't important. The amount for a $150,000 house, if such exists in Eugene, is not really going to change the math. But being able to, of course, tax a $300,000 or $400,000 house, it raises a lot of money. And if our feeling was if somebody can afford a $300,000 house but not a $303,000 house, buy a $300,000 house. Because there's not that much difference. So our affordable housing, our home ownership programs were supportive of the construction excise tax.
Thank you for that clarification. And if I may ask just one more question, Stephanie, before I ask you to give your input. The 800 plus thousand we're talking about, that's not just on building a new home. That includes if somebody builds a barn or adds onto their existing house.
On the residential piece, it specifically includes remodels and additions. Yeah, it's within the definition
of living space.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, it probably doesn't include your barn.
And it's an expansion of living space, more square footage, not redoing your kitchen and bathroom and stuff.
That's right.
So the barn, would that be included as a commercial?
Unless you're going to live in it.
Yeah. It's not commercial either. So a farm barn is exempt from everything.
I don't think so.
So we all build barns then, right?
Okay. Who knows?
Okay. Thanks, Stephanie. Please.
I really don't have a lot to add to what Jacob and Norton and John have expressed. I mean, I can simply say that City Council did meet to discuss this issue in April, and as a part of that session, they asked for some further consideration, development of recommendations related to the CET and inclusionary zoning components. And so I've just been supporting the work of the Housing Policy Board as they've been examining those different issues and helping to gather and research information.
Excellent. John, please.
So not to argue with Ed about the impact on the cost. That's a policy decision for you to make. And clearly the state statute gives you incredible discretion whether to adopt it, and if you adopt it, what to exempt, if anything. There are some statutory exemptions, such as churches, that you can't tax them with a CET, but you also have the choice to exempt, to not do a residential CET, only do a commercial one, not do a commercial one, just do residential. You also have the authority to exempt properties or valuations under a certain amount. Both Portland and Tillamook County exempt properties at $100,000 or less. Portland when Portland, as I said, Portland did this more than a year ago. They were worried that they were going to get a whole rash of permits at $99,000 to avoid the tax. That's not what's happening. We've heard from them. But so you have that choice. You get also to define how you would use the money, assuming you adopt one. It's incredibly broad. It's housing, it's affordable housing, and then another place housing as you define it. So that could be workforce housing. And you'll notice that when we listed the cities that have done this already, a lot of those are coastal cities or gorge cities that are struggling to get service workers that can live in their communities. So you've got that. And so some of them have actually targeted the proceeds to what they're calling workforce housing. So not the very low income stuff that Norton and I worked on for 40 years, but people at 80% of median income. You could also use the money for services. I know you all are talking about trying to address the emergency service need in Lane County, rural Lane County. And for example, having a staff person that could help churches or whatever, people who want to host a family in their yard. You're going to have to pay for somebody to service that program. You could use this money for that. There is no restriction on the money as to how you define it. In fact, 50% of the commercial CET has nothing. I mean, it doesn't say it has to even be for housing. It's for whatever. I mean, we want it to be for housing because that's what we do. But you get to make that decision. Norton mentioned this already, and let me emphasize this. In our proposal that we've been working on, 3 nonprofits who do homeownership are part of the group that developed it. That's St. Vincent de Paul, Habitat, and NEDCO. And then lastly, I'd say that we're meeting this afternoon with the realtors to talk about it. I emailed Ed this morning to try to set up a meeting in which we could talk with Ed to see whether we can address any of his concerns. I don't know that we can, but I've known Ed a long time, and I know he's a person of good faith, and we'll be talking.
Right back at you.
Thank you for the important distinction regarding the exemptions that can be applied either to the gathering of the revenue or the distribution of the revenue. And so my question, Lane County obviously is a small part of the construction, and the county of Lane is a small part of the construction. The city of Eugene, interesting to see where the discussion goes there, but the city of Springfield also. So, one danger is to set up islands of places where you can build and not be paying the CET, and where so in the past, for instance, builders have often said, I'm going to build in Springfield because, and fill in the blanks. The folks who live on this side of the freeway, who gather taxes on this side of the freeway, don't like it when that kind of thing happens. So that being said, I'm interested in knowing what the other big cities are doing, what the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield are considering. And Stephanie, it would be unfair to ask you what Springfield is doing, unless you happen to know. But so this meeting...
It would be unfair.
But that wouldn't be the first time I asked you to do something that was unfair. But what the purpose of this meeting is to get information to see where we as a county would like to go in a direction. So Commissioner Sorensen.
One thing that I thought would be helpful, in addition to the remarks you've all made, is we're kind of in the second wave of this. So if the city of Eugene or another city in Lane County moves ahead with this, or if Lane County moves ahead with this, we have the benefit right now of what the other jurisdictions have done. In other words, what is the effect on home ownership? Did it decline, which is not something we want? Did it increase, which is something we want? In other words, and the revenue. We've been through this revenue thing recently with the promises on the so-called recreational marijuana, where the advocates of the state initiative said, well, one thing that's really going to be good is all of the local revenue that cities and counties are going to receive from this, this newly previously untaxed thing. Well, it hasn't turned out that way. We haven't really received much revenue. And the advocates, they're down the road doing something else, perhaps benefiting from their newfound freedom to smoke marijuana. But we're not getting the revenue from it. And so I'm just curious, what is now the current experience with these jurisdictions that have done this? Did it turn out to be a good idea? I hope so. That's one of the reasons I wanted this work session.
So I'm probably the best person to answer. It's too soon to say for anybody except Portland, because Portland's went into effect in June of 2016. Everybody else's is more recent, and in fact, nobody has actually, I think, got much money collected yet. The prediction in the city of Portland was that the inclusionary zoning part of it would depress new development. And the inclusionary zoning aspect went into effect, I think, in January 1 of 2017. And what I'm hearing from Portland is that that's turning out to be true. So Portland, but it's hard to say because the market in Portland was, there was no multifamily development during the Great Recession, and then it went nuts. And they've been building tens of thousands of multifamily units at the high end, but still new units. And what we're hearing is that the pipeline is like somebody turned off the faucet as of January 1 because of inclusionary zoning. We're not hearing that with regard to the CET. In fact, just the story the other day was that Portland finally dropped out of the top 3 in terms of increases in prices of single-family homes nationally, in terms of percentage increase. And I don't think we know any data about the impact of the CET on single-family price.
What about Bend?
Well, Ben's has been in place for 16 years. It's hard to say that there's any impact. There's a lot of development that goes on in Bend. There's a high demand. So how do you tell whether I'm sure the demand would be there without that. And it's a smaller tax in Bend, to be honest. It's 0.1, not 1%.
But it's been in Bend, knowing the housing authority director there, Tom Kemper, he's building units because of funds from that pool.
They've leveraged that tax money beautifully. Done amazing things.
I think we saw an article, or at least maybe I remember seeing an article on Bend, and specifically the growth in the building of affordable housing in Bend as a result of this.
I would say too, on the inclusionary zoning, I would agree with John, and it doesn't take a real sharp mathematician to put a quick number on inclusionary zoning. So if you build 100 units and 20% of those, you have to drop the rent levels by, let's just say it's $200 per unit per month. Those are big numbers very quickly, and they can make or break developments.
But just to note, a typical inclusionary zoning in California and Maryland, there is no public subsidy in that. It's the developer eats it. So what Jacob's point is that to reduce the price by 200 units on the 30% of affordable units, you're going to have to raise the price on the other non-affordable units. And that a developer can only do that if it pencils still. So I've always said that it only works in red-hot markets. But what we've authorized in Oregon, the legislature requires the local government to subsidize those included units in some fashion. And Portland has a very complicated formula for doing that, which I can't see anybody else.
So it's Bend, but not Deschutes County, correct? So the homes being built in Eagle Crest do not pay this.
I think that's correct.
So those $800,000 $1 million homes built in Eagle Crest do not pay this. Just in Bend, Oregon.
Okay.
So the article is that Commissioner Sorensen might be referring to is the one I've got a printed out copy of here. And their 0.1%, I do not think has built 695 new apartments since January 1st of 2016, which is what's happened in Bend. And because of that, they've actually got folks offering discounts and reducing rents in Bend. They have quotes from several property managers said, with more units on the market, Andy Jesse, owner of A Superior Property Management, said prices have dropped for her single-family houses, multifamily properties, and the company is changing lease terms. So, when we get down to the whole housing crisis, it's about economics and about supply versus demand. And across the country, in a lot of ways, we've done a lot that's restricted supply, and particularly in the state of Oregon we have. So it's really about supply, supply, supply. Then, because of their economics and all that, suddenly got this burst of multifamily, and they had available lands for multifamily. And it must have penciled out for the investors, and they got almost 700 units built in a little bit more than a year and a half.
That's a red-hot market you're talking about.
Yeah. But the impact of that is people are having to give freebies to get people to rent their units now. Discounts and reducing rents and everything to attract renters. You're not seeing that in the Eugene Springfield market because we're not getting multifamily built. So the issue is supply. Supply, supply, supply. It's an economic thing. So as we were talking about a construction excise tax, when you think about economics, another piece of that is if you want to suppress an activity, you tax it. And in fact, this board has discussed several times raising tobacco taxes to suppress tobacco use by youth. And we just recently had a large discussion about advocating for a higher beer tax and wine tax in the state for similar reasons. So, now we're talking about we're going to tax housing to try and increase the supply of housing. It's almost, economically oxymoron. You're going to tax something to try and increase the supply of that very thing you're going to tax. So, economically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So for me, the residential construction excise tax is a non-starter. It just doesn't work. The other issue there is you're going to pull that money out of the housing market hand it to a government entity, we're going to be able to charge at least 4% admin fee on it. We're going to send 15% of that up to the state, where they're going to eat up part of it, the cost of that, and then try and redistribute it back down here. By the time that dollar that we collect in that tax gets spent on affordable housing, it's going to be about 60 cents. So really, is it worth pulling that money and increasing the price of housing in our community? Not to mention, when you're talking about Lane County's building permit activity, it's really about single-family homes out in rural areas, because we don't permit anything inside of the city limit. Everything we permit is outside of city limits. So that's what we're talking about taxing is folks that are adding a bedroom onto their house out in Elmira, or the person that's building a new home down outside of Cottage Grove or somewhere up the river in Blue River. So I appreciate all the discussion of the issue. I don't think anyone denies that we have an affordable housing issue in this county, and particularly around the Eugene-Springfield area. But we're talking about, if I wanted to hammer a 4-penny finishing brad into some molding, I don't grab a sledgehammer to do it. Yes, it's a tool, but it's the wrong tool. It's going to do more damage than it's going to actually drive the nail. So, for me, I appreciate the discussion. It'd be great to get a revenue stream that would help us build more affordable housing. Then again, what we're doing when we build affordable housing is, we build that affordable housing complex on a piece of property that could have been other multifamily and additional supply. So we're taking up land that is actually part of our supply of housing inventory to build that housing. We need to expand that supply of land for that, so we can attract investors to actually build, more multifamily in this area. If we had that kind of boom, comparative to the population, 700 units in Bend versus what that would be here, that would be 2,000 additional units in the Eugene-Springfield area. What would that do to rents? And what would that do to the low-income market? Even if they're building on the high end, people are renting down right now because they can't find anything to rent. So that's why there's so much competition in the affordable housing. So I don't see this as the right solution to the problem. It'd be great to look for something that would be more of a generalized revenue structure to go into affordable housing. But it's taxing something that we want to develop more of that thing. It just seems to be economically an unsound policy.
Thank you for your perspective on that, Commissioner Bozovich, and we can discuss that a little bit more in detail in terms of what has happened historically with revenue streams and how revenue streams have been turned back into the industry, or into the industry that is being taxed, so to speak. That's a long discussion. It's more than just a simple equation. Commissioner Lycan, and I have a few more things to say about that. Commissioner Lycan.
So, John, I have a question for you, and that is, so Bend has been in place for a long time, but Redmond has not. Is that correct? Do you know if Redmond is even considering this?
So in the memo that we have drafted, and I think that Steve included this, there's a list of other cities that we're aware of that are considering it. And that those other cities...
That includes Sisters, Astoria, McMinnville, Salem, Newburgh, and Milwaukee.
Okay, but Sisters is not Redmond.
Correct.
And I mean not even close.
No, so Redmond's not on the list.
No, and I bring that up for an important reason. Redmond is an economic hub. They're an inland port. They have a major airport. So it's a completely different focus than, say, where Bend is. And I think Deschutes County as a whole Deschutes County has become resort central. And so you have Deschutes County as a whole has probably not necessarily looking at this. I don't know. A couple of the commissioners I know very, very well at Deschutes County, so I wouldn't mind just checking in with them and just ask if they're even looking at it. It doesn't necessarily sound like it.
So that would be good. I happened to meet Alan Unger last week, who's the
Who's no
former
longer
mayor of Redmond and a former
Yeah.
Deschutes County commissioner.
Yeah.
And if I reversed the meetings, I could have asked him that. But
Yeah, and that's okay, because, but
We'll see a lot of them next week.
yeah, we will. The AOC is coming in town, so.
Oh, that's right.
From my perspective, and it's interesting because maybe I do have a little bias here, I don't know. And that's, I think you all understand that. I mean, my family came directly from the home building industry. And, our family's company was the 1990 Home Builder of the Year by the State Association. And my father was president of the mid-90s in the association. And I look at it from that perspective. But kind of backing out of it, I'm not sure Lane County is the right avenue for something like this. When you talk about the county. Now, if the cities want to take a look at this, and I'm going to focus more on Eugene Springfield, and the reason why is because Eugene Springfield proper is 65% of the population of Lane County. Eugene Springfield Metro is 75% of the population of Lane County, which is probably where you're going to have success if you're going to attract anything like that. And as you know, each cities have their own charters. They have their own governing agencies, their own elected officials, and I think are probably in a better position to make decisions like this. I've been somewhat critical of the city of Eugene with the student housing. Jacob's heard me, I don't know how many times, talk about this, because I look at these student housing areas and I'm thinking, my gosh, this could have been multifamily housing right where the student housing is. What a waste of opportunity. And so it becomes a confidence game for me. So if the cities aren't interested in pursuing this, then why would Lane County? And that's really because I believe the actual tool where you would see success would be in the cities themselves, and in particular, Eugene Springfield. But that's up to those respected governments, and I'm going to respect where they are on that. So I personally think that Lane County is not the right place for this to be in. That's my personal opinion. I think because there's not enough housing permits in Lane County, and on the commercial side, that's absolutely correct. And where on the commercial side, you probably have a much better rate of there within the two large cities, Eugene and Springfield, than you ever would in Lane County itself. So my thought is really from the Lane County Board of Commissioners perspective, and that's the hat I'm going to wear, period. I don't think it's the right place for this to be in. Now, if Eugene is interested in having a focus and wants to pursue this, that's really their decision, and they could probably make a pretty good case for it. If Springfield wants to do it, they could probably make a pretty good case for it. You and I have talked about the inclusionary zone clear back, I think, in my first term as mayor. I mean, it goes way, way, way back. And I had an interest there. There was an interest there, but again, that fit is there. I'm here now, so I will let Mayor Lundberg, I respect her. I'm no longer focused on governing the city of Springfield. That's out of my head. It's this Springfield City Council. They're responsible. Period. So overall, that's kind of my thought. And when I talked about Deschutes County, and of course the makeup is so different there than what it is here. Redmond has kind of pursued a little bit more of a employment. They've gone after some employment companies who have focused and have come there. Bend is gone a completely different route. There is employment, don't get me wrong. There's significant employment there, but not the big manufacturing base there used to be. That's all but disappeared. Senator Byron and I were talking about Bend in particular, but even Deschutes County. 20 years from now, Deschutes County is likely to be the next Washington County. And there's a lot of, because of the real focus that's gone on in Redmond and other areas for that employment piece, along with the high-end housing that you continue to see. I mean, folks don't get that Washington County's median family income is approaching $100,000 a year. And their median family net worth is $800,000. Think about that. It's almost $1 million from median family net worth in one county in the state of Oregon. But they're not part of that, are they? Or are they even considering it?
Well, Washington County would be allowed to. Metro is prohibited from adopting.
Metro's prohibited, but Washington County could.
Washington County could.
But are they on the list that's even considering it?
Well, I haven't asked them.
Yeah,
but
and
so
I-
they're not the only two counties we
Okay.
know of are Hood River and Tillamook.
Okay.
They're both service industry.
So right now, I think it's early. I don't want to discount this for a potentially future conversation, but I think it's a confidence game right now in the city of Eugene in particular, and I think there's a real opportunity here. We're involved with them right now with AXA and with OBI, with a real potential for affordable housing complex that could be I view it as transformative. I do. I think it's a real golden opportunity for this community. But until you can see more of those opportunities being developed here and get out of the student housing business, I think you build a confidence game that then you can make the case that not only Eugene, but all of Lane County could potentially look at this. And so those are my thoughts here. And I don't want to discount anybody's thoughts coming in, because I really appreciate, I mean, serving on the Housing Policy Board opened my eyes tremendously, and I was very appreciative of that. And Norton's passion was always got me, and of course John. But I do believe at the end of the day, the confidence game I think needs to change a little bit, and before I think from Lane County's perspective to go down this road. If Eugene wants to and if Springfield wants to, I think they can make the case today that it makes sense. Lane County, I'm not sure we can. Those are my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Larkin. You know, remember back in 1997, we had a 1% utility tax that we suggested. It was a council committee to finance affordable housing at CC5. And it got rejected, 72%?
I think it was 2 to 1.
Yeah,
65%.
65%. Which a part of that rejection was what I viewed as a campaign of misinformation. And a part of that misinformation was, well, you're not going to pay it here, but you are going to pay it there. So why would you imbalance it? And so for me, you know, if we'd done that then, we'd have had about $1 million a year in dollars then. Where would we be today as far as front doors are concerned? It'd be a very different environment, very different landscape in town. But the campaign was easy to launch against it. And people who didn't really think about it very much or study it very much saw little snippets of campaigns saying, that's right, so it's a no. And it shocked me, the level of no that came out of that one.
So, Pat, if I could add that there's one other precedent here. That was in 1989, after Lane County created a Blue Ribbon Task Force on affordable housing. Yes. Jim Johnson was the county administrator then. I was on that group, and that group recommended a business license tax of, I think, $100 a year. Cresswell has a business license tax. And we estimated that it would generate about $1 million a year in 1989. And it was an issue for the board to decide, and the board decided not to do it 3-2. So there's 2 other examples where we've tried to find a broad-based source to pay for affordable housing and failed.
So I guess the point I'm looking at there is for us to discount Lane County, I think that within a jurisdictional border, uniformity is important. Otherwise, you have a legitimate reason to launch a campaign against it. And it's easy to drown out the good with the bad because people are more receptive to hearing bad news than good news, and especially when it comes to paying more of their paycheck or more of their income in taxes or whatever it may be. That being said, I don't believe that we can compare Eugene and Lane County to Bend and Deschutes County, because the people who want to live in Eugene and Lane County are graduated from high school here, and that's not the case in Deschutes and Bend. People aren't, not to say that they aren't graduated from high school and wanting to live there, but really it's attractive. People are coming there from all over, much more than they are here. So I'm in favor of continuing the conversation gathering more information and hearing more from the home builders about their recommendations, hearing more from the Housing Authority and from the Housing Policy Board, and especially from the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield as to what can we look at as an entire community. Sitting around this table right here, we really do have limited impact. It's, as Commissioner Lycan says, not much of the activity is in the county compared to what's happening on both sides of the freeway. So that's where I'd like to personally would like to continue the conversation is on a broader base as to what is something that we can, as an entire community, talk about, and as an entire community, move toward accepting.
So as Norton said, I think earlier, the Housing Policy Board will consider a proposal on Monday to give to Mayor Vinnis, and then scheduling it before council is up to council. We have had no conversations with the City of Springfield. The City of Springfield withdrew from the Housing Policy Board. And the Mayor Lundberg has not asked for any input on a possible CET for the City of Springfield. Mayor Vinnis did for the City of Eugene.
And there's a noon meeting still?
Yeah.
Yeah, during our discussion, I was sitting here thinking, with all the brain power in this room, we should be able to come up with a community solution. And then you brought up the utility tax. That is something I would hold a sign on Ferry Street Bridge to support. And I also think that a lot of the conversation around homelessness and everything has changed recently. I've seen the pendulum swing back. We all know that we have a housing crisis. And it seems to me that if we could vote to repair roads, that surely we could vote to put a roof over people's homes. Something like that, I would be 110% for it. One other thing that I'd like to say about affordable housing, we definitely need more of it, but when they're done, let's go back and take a look at them. We need to support it and continue to build them, but it's my understanding that each individual unit at Baskin Village, an outstanding project, cost $187,000 per unit. And I sit here and think how many more units we could have if a lot of that government regulation cost was reduced. So when we do affordable housing projects, when they're done, let's go back and take a look at the unit cost and see how we can reduce that would result in more units.
Good points there too. And you mentioned the Blue Ribbon Committee from 1989 and the Council Committee to Finance Affordable Housing from 95, 6, 7-ish. Those were attempts to get the entire community behind a single revenue stream or revenue source that was evenly distributed, more evenly distributed. So I'm hearing a little bit of energy surrounding that. And I'm really very interested. I've been talking about that 1% utility tax. Right about that same time, the Bethel School District put a bond measure out for technology in schools, and it failed pretty miserably. So, actually, it was a little bit before it was when I was on the school board. So the next ballot, we put the same measure out, the exact same measure out, and it passed almost 2-1. Because the naysayers, the people who were against it, many of them heard more information and voted for it. So, so looking at what we've done in the past and saying, well, that failed, so let's not do it again. I think it's safe to say that everybody would like to see everybody housed. We need to move toward more front doors, more people living in affordable housing, and our neighbors around us. And when we have kids getting up in the morning, getting out of the car door that they slept behind and going to school, that's a heartbreaking situation, and it's rife throughout our county. Who can not support that? And then finding a way to make it a broad-based support and convince people. Not convince people of anything, but just provide information that people can understand in terms of people can believe and understand. I'm in favor of moving forward with that. So Commissioner Bozovich, Commissioner Lycan have expressed a lack of interest in moving forward with this discussion. I'm expressing a keen interest in moving forward with the affordable housing discussion. And I think I can't always speak for the board, but we talk about it all the time. How do we move forward with affordable housing? Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep my remarks pretty much in a bullet form because My colleagues here have expressed a lot of concerns and thoughts that I have. A lot of this has to do with local control. Various communities all are have their elected bodies, and so there is that consideration with local control. My 16 years in government in Cottage Grove, one of the loudest concerns that I heard, and there were 3 or 4 major topics, but it all had to do with the cost of pounding that first nail. Permit fees, site acquisition, preparation, all of that. Before you pound the first nail, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. So to add additional financial burden to that structure is difficult for me to accept. I believe that what we've heard today is an opportunity to explore various options. And I guess there's more I could say, but I think that kind of sums it up, that I concur with my fellow commissioners, Mr. Larkin and Kozovich and Chair Farr, that we have some work to do here. I think there is great opportunity. We all agree on one thing, and that is that housing is of critical need to the people of Lane County, and we need to figure out how to make this work and how to get homes built and places for people to reside other than out of doors or in automobiles, if they're fortunate enough to even have an automobile. So it's a huge problem, but it's not insurmountable. We can do this. But I do believe that an excise tax is not an appropriate vehicle to add additional burdens onto an industry that already, in many folks' view, is overburdened with the regulation and initial startup costs. Thanks.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say at the conclusion of this work session how much I appreciate all the knowledge and expertise and commitment to housing and affordable housing in particular. I also think that there's no doubt that the Board of Commissioners will continue discussion of issues as significant as affordable housing in our community and the appropriate way to deal with not just a problem but a crisis that is affecting our community. I, for one, am a big advocate of home ownership. I'm really glad that we heard from Ed in particular on a topic that's close to me, and that is, I think children do better when they're raised in homes where the homeowner, the parent, is there. I think it's a way to build equity. I think that we as the commissioners can be leaders in trying to promote home ownership and in our community. I do take maybe a different view from some that have expressed the view about, well, all these different jurisdictions in Lane County, and my view is, hey, we're here to serve 370,000 people who live in Lane County. Some live in cities, some live by a creek 70 miles from Eugene, some live all over the place, and some don't have any place to live. So my view is that we have to serve all these people and cope with the various levels of government that we've inherited, whether it's federal, state, regional, local, intergovernmental, and on and on. And my view is that this job will never really be done, but I think that we've heard a little bit more about what opportunity the state's given to counties and cities. If they want to pursue it, I think we should learn a lot more about it, and I appreciate the willingness of all of you to show up today and further educate us.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the discussion. A couple of last things that I'm going to say about this. I personally am willing to grasp at straws to put people into housing. And this is not a straw by any stretch of the imagination, but I believe that we as a community, we as a Board of Commissioners, and every single jurisdiction inside of Oregon, for that matter, needs to devote as much energy as possible on finding ways to put people into housing. This is one way. Revenue streams are one way. Land and land availability is another way. Zoning and codes are another way, and housing types are another way. And you guys are the experts on this. I've been watching both of y'all for a lot of years. Jacob joined us in recent years, but Jacob's been doing it for many, many, many years also. And Ed, you replaced Max, right? You were right after Max.
Max, yeah.
Yeah.
1997.
So that was a long time ago also. And so we have a lot of brain power in Lane County. And a lot of people have dedicated a lot more time than I have to finding ways and innovative ways to put people into housing. You look at what's happening with the Square One Villages right now. Tiny houses. That's a wave of the future. Look what's happening in Springfield with the ADUs. They're exploring ADUs. Eugene's beginning to do the same. And in fact, Eugene has a great opportunity that they're exploring. So I'm excited about the things that we can do. I'm excited about getting the energy of all the jurisdictions behind it. And as far as the CET is concerned, I'm going to keep an eye on it. And if I may, Pete, follow you to the AQB meeting on Monday and sit in the back row and listen to the discussion, because I'm eager to hear more. I'm eager to find ways to get every single person who's sitting at this table and everybody who is represented by everybody sitting at this table to agree on the direction we need to go. Not just a concept, but let's get some specific strategies in place that really can be effective for the long term, long past the service time that any one of us is putting in. So I'm thankful and highly appreciative that we had this discussion today. I think it just raised the heat a little bit on the fact that we're not allowed to call it an emergency, are we? But I feel it's an emergency as far as housing is concerned. And particularly the people who get up in the morning and don't have a place to take a shower. It's an emergency. Commissioner Sorensen. I think Commissioner Sorensen's voting that. Commissioner Lycan.
So my twin brother over here. So let's see, my right. Just kidding. So one of the things, though, I think, and this was mentioned earlier in this conversation, I think this is a key phrase that needs to be developed even more into the mindset of the public, and that's workforce housing. And it's not quite there yet. See, the public, and in fact, sometimes I think the term affordable housing, that goalpost has moved all over the place. I'm not even sure what affordable housing is anymore. And affordable housing used to be, when it was first developed, was in a sense workforce housing. Now affordable housing is, maybe it's tiny homes, I'm not sure what it is. But the piece on the workforce housing, I think, that's the area that is where I think a lot of improvements can be made. And this is where I think all of the bodies here, whether you're an advocate for for affordable housing, the homelessness, or where you're an advocate for home ownership, this is the one area I think you can clearly come together and start and really define what workforce housing actually means, how important it is to the community, and if we're going to continue to grow. I'm sure you all saw the headline yesterday that Corning is the mystery buyer, and we don't know what that entails. We at this time we have no idea. But if that's something that's there in a major multinational corporation like that, that's not going away. By the way, they're still really they're a major big company. Do we have the workforce housing to accommodate the people that are going to work there? And that's, to me, that's one of the more important areas that really needs to be defined. I know Regional Solutions has been working on this and trying to define this a little bit more. I just saw this in the governor's office. But we're in 2017, and we're just now kind of seeing this coming even from the state. What does this look like? And finally, I'll say this, and John, this will probably be more for you than anybody else, and that is, I apologize. It was my father that hired John Chandler.
Chandler just retired.
He did.
Actually, in March. Yeah.
He did. But anyway.
He's not going away, though.
Could I add one comment to respond to Commissioner Bozovich about the supply issue? I've spent, as I said, 40 years, and I'm a huge proponent of increasing the supply, whatever the income. I did a lot of work in that area in land use planning as a volunteer. Stephanie and I heard a presentation on Friday in Portland from an expert, national housing expert from Harvard, and I'll forward his PowerPoint to you all. He pointed out that nationally, and he also had looked specifically at Portland, nationally what they're seeing is a big increase in housing production, but no trickle down. I mean, we all know the housing market is cyclical, and usually what that happens is when there's more production, prices decline. The people who were at the top end move up to the new housing, and that frees up housing and rents decline. He said that's not happening nationally. And that Bend article that Commissioner Mosevich mentioned makes that same point of we're not sure whether we're going to see that happen in Bend as a result of the new construction. So it may be that we're in a different dynamic now, that supply isn't going to solve all of our problems, because I understand that argument that the solution is supply. I don't think it's the solution for the very low income that I advocate on behalf of. It may not be the solution anymore for the middle income. Anyway, I'll forward that article to you all, and we can all see where things go in the future.
And as we move forward, I have 3 sons. One lives here, one lives in Ohio, one lives in San Francisco. 3 very different markets as far as what you're going to get for housing. So my son in San Francisco lives in a row house at $2,000 a month for a relatively small apartment. My son in Ohio just sold a condo in Portland, a 700 square foot condo for I think around $400,000, and bought this house for $90,000 in Ohio. So and then my other son, who lives and works in Eugene, is paying half of his income for an apartment, and it's the only apartment they could find. So that's what we have to grapple with is our particular situation here, which is different to Deschutes County. It's certainly different to Tillamook and Hood River. But what can we do? What can we do here that is going to be effective? And that's where the brains around this table, to use Ed's term, the people sitting around this table and the people that we represent can get together. And I'm convinced we can find solutions. We're beginning to. Are we scratching the surface yet? Maybe just scratching the surface, but there's a lot that we can do, a lot we need to do, and it needs to be a community-wide understanding and a community-wide effort. So thank you all for participating today. I do believe we made progress. With that, any further items for today's agenda, Mr. Heisey? Seeing none, we are adjourned.